Okay, hello and welcome to STEMversations. This is our weekly podcast where we really talk through educational technology brought to you by PrairieSTEM. Each week we bring a different friend of ours in education and have a conversation. It's just an open conversation about all things STEM and classroom related. So I'm Robbie Jensen.
And I'm Jeff Ingram.
And I'm Paul Clark.
Yippee. We're glad to have Paul with us today.
Yeah, super excited to have Dr. Paul Clark with us today. He's a longtime friend of Jeff and I, and lots of stories that we could share. Probably not all needed on this podcast, but lots of things that we could talk about today.
What about Philly? When the SD? No, never mind.
Oh, you mean the microbits?
Oh, yes,
We'll
the
keep
microbits.
this
can
on
talk about
technology,
that.
yes.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we can talk about
Anyway.
microbits.
Yeah.
So
Paul, just introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us, a little bit of your background,
Okay.
and then something that's exciting you in the STEM arena right now.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, I started teaching in the late 1970s. I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for a few years. And back in the day when I was in Fremont, and we had one computer for 10 schools. And the first day that I got to have the computer in my building, we had a snow day in Fremont. Fremont never had snow days. So I drove in a blizzard to play with the computer. So anyway, it goes back a long way. I've taught 4th, 5th, and 6th. In Elkhorn, I was a 4th grade teacher, then became the technology coordinator, and left Elkhorn for the University of Nebraska, which I loved for 17 years, and then retired from there and went to Gretna, where I had my dream job teaching K-5 technology. That was really a great job. And for the last year, I've been at PrairieSTEM doing really kind of amazing, whatever I want to do, technology things.
That's awesome. One of the things, Paul, that has always drawn me to your work is, especially when you just said like K-5 technology was like your dream job. When it came to the littles, you were always one who never was like said, oh, they can't do it, they're too young. What kind of experiences led you to be able to just, every time you'd work with kids, we're going to do some higher level programming or they're going to be doing microbits. And you're like, oh, they can do it.
They can do it. Well, they can do it, I think a lot of times people are just afraid to try something with little kids. And truth be told, when you're doing stuff with kindergartners, you can mess up 50 times and the kids still love what you're doing. And it's just really, really true, and because they just seems like they have this ability to figure out things, and they're not afraid of pushing buttons, and they're not afraid of trying things. And just recently at PrairieSTEM, we did a camp with K-2 immigrant students, and it was robotics. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this, especially since the interpreter didn't show up? So we used Ozobots. And if you've ever seen the Ozobots, they're nonverbal little robots that use colors, so the kids could draw colors and observe what happens and make them go ahead and do it. And I always ask myself, what's the worst that can happen when I do this? I can try it and I can succeed. And if I succeed, then people go, wow, you're really smart. And if I fail, they say, well, nobody could really have done that anyway, so it's okay. So it really doesn't matter. And you just try and you see what the kids can do. And then you build on that just a little bit, and you build on that a little bit. And pretty quick, you've got some kind of fun things going on with the kids.
Awesome. Is there anything fun or exciting you've done this last month or two or this summer that you want to share?
Well, just last week, we did a workshop for 30-ish teachers on building a robot out of just DC motors and microbits, which brings me back to Philadelphia. We'll talk about that a little bit later if you want, where we first saw those, and a little motor controller board. And I was concerned because we were doing kindergarten through 12th grade teachers. And I thought, wow, how are we going to keep everybody engaged in this? But as it turns out, there was something we did for everybody. They learned how to attach the motors. They almost had to learn how to solder wires together when I told them the wrong wires to get. So Jeff wound up soldering 300 wires together for us that day. Plan B, always have a plan B. Always have sometimes a plan C, But that was pretty exciting because by the end of the day, everybody had built a little robot with wheels out of a cardboard box and motors and a microbit. And if we'd had a little more time, we could have had sensors so they could have turned the lights off and it would have driven by itself. But, that's one thing that's always amazed me is time is such a valuable commodity for teachers. And I think that's one thing PrairieSTEM does is they kind of take some of that time weight off the teacher's shoulders and we can get in and show them some things. This summer, it was one of the things I think was really kind of fun for me this year, and it was scary, was working with the little immigrant kids because they didn't speak a lot of English until the last day when I think they were holding out on me. Last day they started talking to me a little bit more. And I think you observed that too.
I did too,
but
sure.
That was kind of fun. And by the end of the week, the kids were really enjoying what we were doing. We did the NRE this year, the Nebraska Robotics Expo, and that turned out pretty well as well. St. Cecilia's was fun. It's always fun when you're there with kids and you see the look on their face when the light goes off and they go, aha, I can do this.
Yeah.
That's always something that I've always loved watching you with kids is you really can connect to them. And for lack of a better descriptor, you become a little kid and you're just as excited as they are. And they really feel that energy and that excitement. And you really
it is a lot of fun.
Them.
When I left for Gretna, somebody I worked at the university with said, well, what's the difference between teaching graduate classes and teaching fifth graders? And I said, well, to be honest with you, the fifth graders get it. Not that graduate students aren't good or anything, but they were so focused on getting an A. What do I have to do to get an A? Fifth graders are saying, this is cool. What do I have to do to get this from point A to point B? And once I figure that out, then get out of my way and let me do it.
Right.
That just seems quite true.
Awesome. You talked about the importance of like educator time. And so sometimes when we talk about these topics of, technology or microbits and all of this, it seems like, well, I can't do that because I'm doing this curriculum and this curriculum. Where does that importance fit into, or why should we be doing this in the classrooms?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Some people get stuck in, teachers, I think, get stuck in, I've been doing this, and this is the way it needs to be done because the kids are learning from this. But there's so many other things that you can do that you can take the technology and replace it. One activity that I did in Gretna was about Nebraska history and crossing the Mormon Trail and how they push their push carts across the Mormon trails. We all know that. Hopefully, we all know that. And so we replaced that. I got the gym teacher, the classroom teacher, myself, and the art teacher involved in this. And we decided we were going to have the kids figure out how long it would take them to walk across Nebraska if they had to do this. So using the iPads, the gym teacher taught them about the importance of having a constant pace and not overexerting yourself and starting, because the kids were going to be doing what we call the Dragon Dash, a fundraiser, where they ran laps. And so then they walked laps in a gym, 100 yards, and we kept that data. They did it 5 times, and then later on in the year, I brought this back up, and we talked about moving across Nebraska, and we said, do you think you could walk across Nebraska? And then we brought this data back up, and then they put it into a Google sheet and figured how long it would take them if they walked straight across Nebraska to get across Nebraska. The classroom teacher was teaching about Nebraska history at the time, so it was really good. But then we talked about constraints. Kids don't always think about that. I said, are you guys going to stop for lunch? What if somebody gets sick? What are you going to do if at night you can't go 24 hours a day? So we said, what are some parameters you have to set? Number of hours a day you can walk, this kind of stuff. And then they could make it across Nebraska, we decided, and then we used Google Earth, and they plotted how far they would go each day, based on what their results of that activity was. So this was not a one and done thing. This was a full activity. And then the culmination and the thing they absolutely loved the best was playing the 1998 Oregon Trail game
of course.
At archive.org.
Until they got dysentery.
Well, until Susie died, Yeah. But they did shoot a lot of buffalo along the way, if you remember the game.
That's right. Yes.
So what's old is new.
Yep. That's awesome. And just bringing it, like you said, that sustained effort too. It wasn't a one and done. You were bringing it into the curriculum throughout the year. You PE teachers, classroom teachers, like everybody was involved.
Well, and so those are the kind of integrated units that I love to have the kids do, because they're seeing it in everything they do. I had a thought that just left my head. That happens to me a lot these days. But one of the things in Gretna was that teachers were expected to come into the technology lab when I was teaching technology. Well, many of them, just use that as a sort of a planning time. But there were a lot of people that said, "Can I do this in my classroom?" And I go, yes, that's the whole point of doing this, is so that you can take this back to your classroom and do it. Well, what are you going to do next year? I said, there are so many things that we can do with technology that you could take everything I do this year, and I could come up with new stuff again next year and not even miss a beat. So there's just so many things. And the last year I was in Gretna, I learned I love the iPads because they're just so versatile. Everybody had one, and you could do photographs, you could do videos, you could do all kinds of stuff. We did at St. Cecilia something I thought was just going to be a kind of a time filler. They were studying fossils, and I went out to the wall of my yard and chipped out a whole bunch of my limestone wall, a bunch of fossils. And I showed the kids then how to use the magnifying tool on the iPad. But before that, I challenged them. I said, there's 2 Lincolns on a penny? And then they had to use a magnifier and find the second Lincoln. Do you know where the second Lincoln is on the penny?
I don't.
It's actually in the Lincoln Memorial, and you zoom in with the magnifier, and you can actually see Lincoln setting in that.
Really?
Which is really cool. And this is with K-1-2 kids. We were doing all of this. With kindergarten and first graders, instead of the fossils, we did leaves. And so we could look at all of the leaf structure of the leaves. And so it brings a whole new world to the kids, that they could do a microscope without having a microscope. They had to engineer a stand for it, which basically meant they put 3 dictionaries together and set the
Right.
iPad on it. And that was a very fun activity to do,
Nice.
And then we taught them how to annotate the pictures and draw pictures on them, and then drag that picture into Google and see if they could identify the fossil.
Yeah, nice.
Uh-huh.
You've done, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of projects and activities with kids. Are there, thinking back over the last 40 years doing that, is there one or two think, wow, that was the coolest things, the kids loved it, that was the neatest thing ever?
Well, it seems to me that the things that I liked the most and the things that the kids liked the most were physical computing, where you can design something on a computer and then you can put it in your hands. 3D printing has kind of been one of those, where kids can design stuff. We've had the scene bots forever. And one of my favorite activities was when the kids tore the scene bots apart and they kept the boards and the motors, and then they 3D printed a body. And then they reassembled everything. And this was 4th and 5th graders, so we used a lot of hot glue and zip ties. And then they were able to drive the robots with the controllers that they built. I mean, that's great. I remember Paul Ingram from West Side. When I first met him, we were soldering little pieces together for the game port on Apple IIe computers.
Oh, wow.
So that we could do some of the same kind of stuff. And he'll show you the scar on his finger where he learned how to solder.
Where he learned how to solder.
For me, the projects that were the most engaging to me seemed like the ones where the kids would build something with Lego motors, and then they could write the code and they could make something happen and go, oh my gosh, if I do this little bit of code here and I can get it to that device, it'll do what I want it to do. To me, I still think that's kind of like magic. I know it's not, but it is fun to do. And it's more fun to see the kids when they're struggling with this. And I was thinking back about when we did the Spheros a couple years ago. We had 1 Sphero per group of kids, and they would sit and discuss the code it would take to go through something, which is something I think that all kids need to do, is learn how to work in that little groups and then decide if it works or not, and they test it. If it doesn't work, go to plan B,
Nice.
As we kind of wrap up our time today,
Okay.
My final question for you really is, what do you see coming down the pike? Like, you've always been kind of on the forefront of what's out there with tech and where we're going. What are some of those, what's that next thing that you think we could really be taking into our classrooms and helping our students understand better?
Well, I'm not a real expert at this, like probably you guys, but I've been looking a little bit of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. And I think that's something that young kids should start to learn. And learn what are the goods, what are the bads, evils, if there are any, you know. And so I think that when we got into social media, kids just boom, went straight into that in 4th or 5th, 6th grade before anybody had any kind of opportunity to teach them stuff. So I think we need to start with some of those advanced things with younger kids, just like digital citizenship. You start in kindergarten with that, telling kids, keep your profile, you know, clean right now, because it's going to come back to haunt you someday. And this, I think it's the same kind of thing. The drone technology is incredible. The virtual reality technology is really incredible. And I expect that stuff's going to keep going and changing. And, you know, the kids need to understand that it's not really smoke and mirrors or magic, that it's really a technology that can be understood.
Fantastic. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We enjoyed our conversation. And
what part are you going to edit out now?
oh, that part where you said...
we never did get to Philadelphia and microbits, but that's okay. That's another story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay.